Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Well, at the beginning, I showed some aircraft carrier, and because we're talking about some part of my talk will cover weapon system security. It's very exciting. My other work, very quickly, CryPTOGUARD. I've been working on software scanning for detecting vulnerabilities for a while. Our tool is being deployed at Oracle, transitioned into software assurance platforms, and so this is not related to CPS, but secure coding is important for everybody. Other work that I did that's actually relevant to where we'll talk a little bit about this is anomaly detection. This is a book that I put together based on my work and the history of anomaly detection, and its different applications for CPS security, network security, host security. In one of the challenges that I focused on is how to reduce false positives, increase accuracy. Very important for deployment. And throughout my talk, I'll emphasize on deployment, sort of how to transition research solutions into practice, which I think is a huge challenge. So defense in depth is today's central theme, which the concept extremely simple. Basically, if you just have one cyber defense, obviously you could be circumvented. And so maybe you could have a whole bunch of them if money allows, budget allows. And so not just to have one door, multiple doors, multi-factor authentication, maybe also have honeypot, and just have all the bells and whistles that you can find. And so this is a simple concept of how to implement this in practice and how to implement this in CPS environment, things like industry control systems. It is not that easy, not that clear. Immediately, how do you know? How can you assess that you are doing well in terms of defense in depth? But time and time again, incidents and data breach incidents shows that this strategy. I want to begin the talk with something exciting. U.S. Government of Accountability Office, GAO, in 2018 had a report describing its audit on weapon systems, U.S. weapon systems, and revealing a lot of deficiencies. And part of it is unable to realize how complicated weapon systems are and the strong connectivity that weapon systems now have, which of course translates to attack surfaces. And then interestingly, the way that the US military works, it all through private acquisition. You have private contractors who build these devices. And so not a lot of emphasis on cybersecurity at earlier phase of the acquisition process. By the way, the GAO, the same office, also recently reviewed, did audit on COVID relief fund, and this is the same office that reported more than $1 billion has gone to dead people as of late April for COVID relief. But go back to the weapon system. What did they find? Things like delays in patching and testing. Okay, what's new, right? So everybody knows that the patching testing on CPS system is extremely difficult. But it does shows a lot of specific numbers, which is very shocking. For example, admin password was compromised within 9 seconds. Obviously, probably some either default or simple passwords. unencrypted password files. For whoever familiar with Morris worm back in the 1980s, 87, that was the time where unencrypted password files were stored, but this is 2018. And it took 2-person team an hour to gain access to a weapon system. And so it's just the gravity of the problem. But there's also issues that are harder to fix. In password, okay, use stronger password. A harder problem is not understanding the attack surface. And so as a researcher, you think about, do you know any tool that give you a good estimation of attack surface? I can think of it. Operator thought crashing is normal, but it's actually due to an attack. This is also hard to fix. So we're gonna talk a little bit again and again, and of course this is a talk that I hope to inspire you to think. I don't have specific solutions. I think nobody has specific solutions, but I think those are, I'm gonna point out challenges that we all should work on as a community. And of course, the other findings, the government employees are just grossly underpaid. And CPS security is difficult because you have to understand CPS and security in order to do CPS security work, which is very difficult. The second point is very interesting. Some officials express confidence, but then don't really know where evidences are, right? So evidence-based confidence showing that something is secure is important. How to do measurement and so on and so forth. So very, very insightful report. In preparation for this talk, I find out that the current fiscal year, DOD put down 247 billion with a B dollars, US dollars, on weapon-related acquisition and research and development. So huge amount of money. And in their report, it listed several cybersecurity focus areas, which is really good. And so if you do look at down the list, all very important focus areas. And so I did a very quick exercise just to see, okay, the issues of vulnerability we find, are they all covered by the focus areas? Some are, like the password in unencrypted files, usually, credential management, stronger credential management, endpoint management will cover it. But I feel like a lot of the harder issues are not really covered. At least it's unclear what do they mean. Improving operators' ability to tell there's something wrong. Also understanding attack surface, right? Understanding where information comes and goes. And so CPS security is in general very difficult. One of the issue is time, which of course not a lot of the typical cybersecurity system has that element, right? So the previous talk, Tim from Virginia Tech is a different location of the same university, present a very interesting thread. So one of the timing element I had sometimes I teach undergraduate security at Virginia Tech, and some students have had a lot of government cybersecurity experiences as interns and so on. One of the students mentioned a very interesting point. He said that aircrafts, right? So flies extremely fast. And they execute missions, say they have to bomb certain area, they just take off and come back probably within like an hour. And so how likely can someone compromise the airplane within an hour while it's flying? So maybe just by virtue of short mission time, we don't have to worry too much. Security is a risk management. If the risk is so low, maybe there is no need to invest on it. And if you look at the aircraft mission capable rate, and this is refers to the uptime, the percentage of up on average airplanes per year, and like 70% of aircrafts are up, and 30% of them down for maintenance and so on. So maybe the risk is not as high as we thought. Unlike servers, they have to be up all time. But this reminds me of this deadly Patriot missile defense failure that happened in 1991. For those of us who are old enough to sort of have some intuitive experience about this. So what happened is that the Patriot missile has some sort of rounding error. But then when the design time, people say, the rounding error is so small, and you're not gonna, it won't accumulate. Because they assume the Patriot missile will only, the day before you, maybe in the morning, you turn it on, and then in the afternoon, you fire it, and then you turn it off. So nothing, no big deal. But turns out that that particular day, when the Patriot missile was supposed to intercept Iraqi's Scud missile, the battery had been up around 100 hours, and so the rounding error accumulated to an extremely significant amount. Plus the speed of the missile is just way off. And so it caused a lot of fatality at that time. And so it's really, is it maybe not a good idea just not doing anything and assume that no one will be able to attack just because of short mission time, because the short mission time is not necessarily short. Secure by being obsolete. This is also a very interesting thought. While I was reading the Gao report, and then talking with a lot of the DoD folks, the research folks, there's just a lot of the critical infrastructure systems are so obsolete, and you wonder, where do attackers be able to get access to, like, at least practice how to compromise those systems? That by itself becomes so difficult. So maybe if you run like a squirrel controlled payroll system, you're secure. Recently, maybe some of you heard of this. COBOL, a 60-year-old programming language, became in session. Turns out the U.S. Unemployment Office used COBOL in their systems. And started hiring people to maintain the system because of COVID, the system was overwhelmed. So maybe, may not be a bad thing, the legacy systems. And so how legacy is it in military CPS systems? On the left, this shows the F-22 Raptor in 2001, okay, so that's like 19 years ago, a report saying this airplanes at that time was using Intel i960 processors, which was out of production for 4 years already by 2001, and then so they were talking about maybe we should switch to PowerPC. And I didn't find any report saying that transition happened. So for all we know, could still be the same processor. Recently, a report showing that Pavehawk, this is a special military helicopter, changed into PowerPC processors. Okay, it was used to use some other control display unit, but now it's PowerPC. It's a big deal. But PowerPC, if for all of us who are familiar with consumer electronics, PowerPC was so outdated. It was introduced in 1995. When I first came to US in 1998, I remember seeing all kinds of PowerPC computers that look really cute. But it was, I think, around 2006, Apple decided to start to use Intel chips inside of PowerPC. PowerPC is a RISC processor, so similar to ARM, and a lot of the ones use are 32-bit. So you may think, okay, so what? PowerPC, if we could power all computers, could also power helicopters. But the problem is that the technology, the hardware security in the last 20 years has developed so much. I'm not even including TPM, Trusted Computing Module, which is for root of trust attestation. But just recently, right? I mean, relatively recently, right? ARM TrustZone, Intel SGX enclaves, those are for isolation, right? So you have secure zone and insecure zone, and so you can do encryption in the secure zone, and you don't care about the infection and the compromise outside of it. Processor trace, PT, also from Intel, supporting tracing control flows, the instructions execution. Then you can reconstruct it into control flows and then look for things that may go wrong. Memory protection extensions, do boundary checking and prevent a lot of very basic vulnerabilities that a lot of the legacy C code has. So none of this is used on any of those important mission critical devices. Because I remember the 2001 by the F-22 took 10 years, a decade to develop and test. And so by the time they say, okay, let's make some for real, and that technology was already obsolete. But that's the reality, right? So that's the reality. It's probably unrealistic to say, okay, change everything. It's expensive and but then so for researchers, which all of us are, what can we do, right? So between the two options we're presenting here, majority of us will say, of course, I'm gonna work on new technologies, but then in reality, we need to secure legacy systems. What can we do? Legacy systems, so for example, if you have really old code and you just cannot get access to the source code, right? You only have binary, and so you have to do binary instrumentation. Say if you have some code that does not do boundary checking, sanity checking on input and trusted inputs, you have to make sure that you add certain instructions. And so there are ways for you to add instructions dynamically or statically. Dynamically, of course, it slow down the system, but maybe more flexible, and you have a better view of what's being executed. So there are different ways. My collaborator, Bart Miller from UW-Madison, Wisconsin, has a tool, DynInst. It's dynamic instrumentation. But then very rarely, I couldn't think of any solution, off-the-shelf solution from research or commercial that support PowerPC. PowerPC instruction platform, right? So you have to be able to understand, okay, this is PowerPC instructions, how can I do it? It's a huge gap. And the researchers, how can we encourage them to do it? And make it rewarding to do it. And so, by the way, the additional findings, okay, I think we have covered this. Poorly implemented security controls are common. So you may have some defenses, but then how well they are. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this measurement issues. A little bit change of gear, industry control systems, which is also extremely critical. DHS has a center, has two centers. One of this is NCCIC, located at Arlington, in charge of disseminating vulnerability and security related intelligence to ICS of different states. And then it welcomes you to visit. This is Virginia Tech delegates, so including me, who visited there a couple of summers ago. It's under the structural-wise, the Department of Homeland Security in US. This is under CSA, Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency. It used to be called a different name. It had a name change, interestingly, in 2016. So in response to the OPM data breach, OPM is Office of Personnel Management. It has a devastating data breach. 21 million records were stolen, and those are including, you know, fingerprints of secret agencies. So they are like no longer secret anymore, because if their fingerprints, if someone get hold of fingerprints and match the attacker match with the stolen fingerprints, will be able to identify and de-anonymize them. There's also a lot of federal security clearance background check files that got released. A timeline I put together based on the reports. And what's interesting is that the hack lasted for so long. It started in 2013. And it's just, you know, there's some, you know, like by the March 14th, OPM actually detected some network blueprints that were stolen. And then in the summer of 2014, NY Times actually reported the data breach. But still, after that, that's where the actual data breach, the bulk of the records got stolen. And then the full discovery was in May 2015. And so extremely hard to detect something's wrong. And there's a Wired magazine article that describes what happened. Is fascinating to read. In the sense that you get a sense of the scale of the attack. And so this is pretty much well recognized as a state-backed hacking, and it's just China government-backed hacking, and it's lasted for a long time. So even though the attack started in 2014, it was only discovered in May when a private security firm was hired into investigating what's going on. And one employee find out that there is a network ping, sort of like a heartbeat going into a domain that is called opmsecurity.org, which is actually not registered by OPM. And so it's attacker controlled, and then that domain registered starting a year ago. And they just find out the actual malware called PlugX. It was named PlugX, was attached to a DLL file. DLL file. This particular DLL file was owned by McAfee, but then that file was infected. PlugX sent back information. And so they were like, okay, how many PlugX infected machines do we have? They find out only 10 machines got infected, even though they discovered like around 2,000 pieces of all kinds of malware. But then PlugX only are on very few number of machines. However, one of them is a portal. It's a gateway leading to the data center, storing all the security clearance questions, all the records. For people who are familiar with the clearance, and they ask extremely intimate questions, extremely detailed questions. And so they start to find out, okay, and eventually they pinpoint that there is a contractor company called Keypoint that may be the culprit, that they got infected first and they got compromised first, and they use one of the contractors' credential to log into that portal. And so they interview they get a hold of the log, a lot of the log entry saying, okay, did you access the data center at this time? And so of course it was a long time ago, people don't remember. However, one employee remember that person was on vacation because it's 4th of July weekend, long weekend, and so that access must be due to the attacker. And so it's just but of course, by the time they discovered this, it was already way too late. One of the issues they later find out OPM is do not have a proxy to do data loss inspection. And turns out a lot of government agencies actually have this proxy, which is exactly like man-in-the-middle attack, but then they are able to inspect SSL encrypted traffic. It's almost become a somewhat standard for government certain government organizations, but then they don't have it. They don't have any log inspection process, and so for me, I work on anomaly detection, and I think that would be a really a missed opportunity in terms of from a defense in depth point of view, right? So if you are able to perceive something like this will happen, log inspection will be extremely necessary. And so, if I work in data loss prevention for a long time, and so when I see, huge breaches like this, I know a lot of them is almost unpreventable. But then you can always add in controls and defenses to make it harder, because there's so many places where you can do to deploy solutions to make it harder. So that's of course is the whole concept of defense in depth. When one thing fails, the other thing may kick in. Of course, this is easy said than done, right? So if for a company or ICS company, oil gas companies has numerous field devices, their cyber security officers, of course, they want to know, okay, how big is my attack surface, right? If you don't know that attack surface, defense in depth is hard to implement. And you have IT, you have OT. And this is a list of recommendations from European Union on SCADA systems. So, the first bullet point is create awareness and understanding, right? So it's also similar to understanding an attack surface. But however, how many tools are there to do asset discovery and management? How much research is done on this topic? And we're talking about extremely huge, big distributed systems. And most importantly, how well are those solutions? OT base is a commercial product. In the commercial world, of course you don't say things like we discover like at most 90%, and so they really don't reveal those kind of statistics. But this is really the responsibility of researchers like you and me. It's our job to find out, to conduct objective and scientific measurement. How hard it is, what are the corner cases, can those tools be able to do it? And we obviously, if you do cybersecurity for a long time, you get extremely paranoid. Whenever people say something, you question everything, and that's the right attitude, right? So we don't blindly accept security products, and the GAO report also indicate that a lot of things are poorly implemented. They say they do one thing, but they don't necessarily do it well. And cybersecurity is, if you don't do it well, then it's not very good. So in recent years, my group has been doing a lot of measurement work. Of course, we had so much difficulties when publishing this type of work. People say, why is this novel? Why am I looking at this? And so I think it's changing. Our work eventually get published, and but then it is changing very slowly. I hope it will change faster. Measurement work is extremely important. So if we then put this is the recent work will presented later this year at CCS. Address space layout randomization, a lot of people, I mean, the coarse-grained ASR is implemented in commercial computers. But we're more interested in fine-grained ASRs, also re-randomization solutions where they do this every few seconds. And we're particularly interested in the just-in-time return-oriented programming attack. On the right-hand corner here, it shows that this JIT ROP attack has the ability to bypass fine-grained ASLR because it can discover isolated code pages through call and jump relations. So it doesn't really matter how you hide it. It will be able to trace some sort of execution and be able to find them out. So we have some interesting findings, including how often, how frequent do you have to re-randomize? And this is where the timing is important, because if you don't allow attackers to gather enough gadgets, ROP gadgets, then you are good enough. You don't have to re-randomize very frequently. So it is a trade-off between performance and security. And so this kind of measurement work was never done before, and of course, it's extremely interesting and insightful. And one of the important finding is you find out, the deficiencies of current system that allow you to see, okay, what else should we improve? One of the deficiencies we find that is no current tools can randomize a glibc library. So the libc library, of course, is so pervasive, and the bid provides tons of gadgets, but then just due to a lot of technical issues that none of the academic protocols, the fine-grained ASL protocols can randomize this. And so, but then if you don't do this measurement, you would think that this problem is solved. But it's not. The initial ROP paper talks about glibc. The libc library provides a Turing complete, a rich context for gadgets. And so the whole point is to secure and randomize the libc library. If you don't do that, then the attacker will still be able to access all the gadgets they need. I mean, you can randomize the application as much as you want, but then eventually they are able to get access to the libc. And so essentially we're basically still score 0 in terms of fine-grained ASR deployment-wise, right? And of course, we find out the actual percentage of quantitative reduction of the gadget availability under certain tools. So extremely useful information. And I'm just glad that there are people who are able to appreciate this type of work. Another measurement work I recently did is on payment card security. So this is the big banks, big dogs. They form secure PCI, secure council, data security council, and came up with a data security standard, DSS. Every system that touches credit card has to be in compliance with DSS. And this is not just US, internationally. And so they would routinely submit reports back to the banks, and so banks will be able to allow them to do transactions with them. And so of course, when you have commercial scanners to do this, do you have cross-site scripting on your web applications? Do you have insecure form submissions? So those kind of external scans, those PCI scanners are supposed to check. Some are more expensive, some are less expensive, and so how well are they? And we set up a test bed to evaluate some of the scanners, and those are the scanners. So some of them are certified by the PCI Security Council, so they're supposed to be good. And the council also have a test bed in order to certify them. But we find that a lot of the scanners are certifying vulnerable merchant websites. Even though the standard is beautifully written, DSS is comprehensive, clear, fantastic coverage, but then it's the actual implementation fell short. And then of course the actual websites, we also have a lightweight scanner that we did our own scan. A majority of them are not PCI compliant. You can check a lot of the required security properties is not satisfied. But to me, one of the biggest deficiency that I find is that even research, like top of the line research solutions cannot do well on our test bed. So if that is the case, I don't expect the commercial tools can do well either, right? Like nobody knows how to do well. And so that of course motivate the researcher, the research community to do more work on how to come up with robust and reliable web scanners that identify application security issues. However, how many researchers are willing to step into that domain? Probably very few, because the minute you say, hey, everybody, I have a really good tool detecting cross-site requests, furtherly, people will say, people like reviewers in conferences will say, no, this is not novel, because we heard about this attack 10 years ago, and then it's already done, okay? But it's far from being done. You know the attack versus do you have a deployable solution that can detect those attacks? Are very different. There's a big gap. So yes, big gap between security knowledge and practice. And it certainly takes a lot of courage and community support in order for us to make substantial advancement in those space. And it's not just the individual effort, it's a community's effort. And of course, what are the unique challenges for operational technology, right? OT, operation technology, is not just IT. For example, anomaly detection, I've done a lot of work on anomaly detection, looking at system call traces, function call traces, logs, to see, okay, do things, should they need to happen in this order? And then we look at how to reduce false positives and so on. But then in CPS system, we had papers looking into, okay, can we maybe translate similar approach? And we immediately realized that you have to understand the physical environment in order to know whether something should happen or not, whether a control command should be issued. If you say, heat up the furnace, what that means that you're assuming the furnace is not hot enough. And if you say, pump certain syringe, and you're assuming that the syringe reading is not high enough. So, and of course, if certain values gets compromised due to attacks, data-oriented attacks, and so on, you have to be careful, because the particular variable in the system, right, in the stack on heap may not be the actual values. You need to have additional feedback loop to read the actual physical environment in order to decide, should I heat the furnace? Should I issue this control command? And so this causality is obviously very unique challenge. And so we have a solution to, the concept is very simple, right? So you just reason about whether a certain control event should occur, and this is the general structure that we have to do. You have to parse the code to identify the events, and you have to build a model to represent the correct transition. And if everything works out, the transition that is allowed is in this order under this condition, and then you think about how to enforce it in real time. And then of course, if we rely on you get additional sensory information to those are the root of trust. And so it's extremely important to recognize that those unique aspects CPS presents. But then if we want to do anomaly detection in legacy systems, it's difficult. When we do research, we assume that we have the top of the lines, PC, the computational power, the so on. We can log whatever events we want. But then legacy systems, it's hard. It's Honeywell had this invented the distributed controller, has different models, 2000, 3000. It was extremely popular, 70s and 80s, and still take the lion's share in the current market. 16 to 18 billions of TDC 3000 in the field. So ExxonMobil was complaining about this just being so obsolete, and then they need to have a better integration with cloud, with the user interface. And so Honeywell had a solution to virtualize TDC as much as possible. And of course, if you have the actual physical component, you cannot virtualize, but then everything else is just a virtualized. And then you can cloud integration, analyze the data science, analyze the logs, anomaly detection, better connectivities, better GUI, the human-machine interface. So that seems to be relatively recent. A lot of reports in 2018. Instead of just to change to new devices, virtualization under this scenario seems to work out well. And so it's really take a lot of innovation. I think the CPS security is extremely interesting because you have to think outside the box, and because there's this physical aspect of it that give you the constraints, and having to work around the constraints and make it exciting. And recently, of course, we've seen a lot of deep learning anomaly detection for CPS. And so my student and I put together a review. Review article right now is under submission. You just look at all this massive amount of deep learning anomaly detection work put together into categories, and also we outline what are the available data sets, available code that people could use. Several challenges we find, several deficiencies that we identified, the gap, the holes that need to be filled by future researchers. You have to state your threat model. A lot of the work, they will just dive into how the neural network architecture works, and then the so on, the math, the equation. But then we are not machine learning. We are using machine learnings to solve actual security problems, and so it's very important to say the threat model, security guarantees, the limitations, and so on. And of course, absolutely need more real world data set. The SUTD in Singapore, they have this water treatment test bed. They also publish data set, which is very useful. We need more data set like that. Performance and evaluation, I understand deep learning is slow, training is slow, but then, you know, we do have to report it, right? Also, one thing is that you don't have to retrain from scratch all the time. You know, incremental training, you know, for deploy is extremely useful in deployment scenario. So that would be a good direction to look into. Parameter selection, this is one of a big challenge. If you think about deployment, companies will not have researchers who are able to fine tune the specific models. They want to plug and play, right? They want to just click and then run. So how to automate threshold selection, parameter selection. A lot of interesting opportunities ahead. Lower corner just shows the performance, and this is the logging overhead. So next, I want to, let me just check the time. Okay, a little bit time. I want to go quickly on here about patching. ICS patching take much longer. But why do we still have to worry a little bit about patching, right? So Equifax in 2017, this is a timeline. It took 146 days for Equifax to patch a vulnerability. But then if you see, the next day, the vulnerability was announced and exploit was released. And this vulnerability is related to a Apache server, which display error messages in a way that's equivalent to executing error messages. And if the error messages has part of it coming from the user, the untrusted user, then you run into problem. Essentially like cross-site scripting, right? And that's what happened. You can do lots of things. So didn't patch, and then, but then it's not just not patching. Equifax also has cross-site scripting on their website, vulnerability on their website. This is a demonstration. At the beginning of this freeze, the freeze pin was a timestamp, which is predictable and shouldn't be right now secure. And in Argentina, South America, their office use default login. So then I ask you, did Equifax practice defense in depth? Obviously, there's so many things they could have done, right? So if you know you have to do defense in depth, right? You're way ahead of Equifax. You know that you shouldn't use a default password. And so this is a picture drawn by someone in UK for the national health systems, the UK's national health systems. But this is extremely good guide. But we also need more measurement, more quantitative measurement, benchmarks, metrics, right? So, and this is, of course, so for those of you who are in government, you're probably familiar with all the regulations. It's extremely complex regulations regarding information security. But what can researchers do? One of my current obsession is to provide evidence-based quantitative risk assessment. And of course, it's hard to solve everything in one paper. You sort of have to do a little bit of everything. And then hopefully down the road, there's someone smart who are able to aggregate a lot of these. But then it's important to emphasize that it's the quantitative part, and the importance of this. And then we need this for CPS very much. And so what I'm showing here is my old attack graph work, and old refers to 2016. So attack graph work is it's a graph summarizing the possible attack paths in a big enterprise network. And then that allow you to reason about different vulnerabilities of different nodes in order for attacker to access this critical asset. What does it have to take? And so you have a more sort of comprehensive view, when we talk about the attack surface, estimation, and so on and so forth. And of course, we need it for CPS. But I want to share is that I had so much trouble publishing this paper. The biggest feedback again and again is that how do you know the numbers you computed is real? And of course, I mean, it's an estimation of the risk, right? We quantify, and you can call it 5, 6, or you can call it high or low. The actual numbers doesn't really matter, but then it's a relative ordering. You can say, okay, I estimate this is more severe than this, and then in reality this makes sense. But no one buys it. No, the people are like, okay, this is just not very useful. And so I hope things are changing. I really hope things are changing. And so I was extremely happy this morning when I saw the best paper award at CNS this year is about graph-based security configuration. And I couldn't find the actual full paper, but based on the news release and related news release and so on, it seems related to something with estimating attack paths in configuration for IoT. So I'm very happy, and I really hope that the community sees the value of this type of work. Even though you cannot prove, even though the authors cannot prove the values are real, because no one can, right? No one can doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything about it. So basically, same message, researchers, we're in a very unique position. We are not here for money. We are here just to have a very objective, do things in an objective scientific way. So we're in a very good position to do benchmark evaluation and measurement to help practitioners. And in my own positions that I involved with SecDev, AXSec, and so on. So we have pushed towards deployable security, evaluating papers with artifact. So those are I think the community does recognize the value of these things are changing, and I hope that we will get better soon. Before I leave, I had a YouTube talk. I want to put my talk on my homepage. If you Google my name, you will be able to find it. I want to put the slide so you'll be able to see it. I recently put together a YouTube talk, an hour long, about imposter syndrome and research. So I encourage you to also check it out. With that, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Thanks a lot. It was a really, really good and interesting talk. I would like to ask attendees if they have any question, please write in Q&A. I will ask Daphne to kindly answer. We have about 6 minutes to the end of this session. Basically, I really enjoyed the fact that you mentioned that all systems or legacy systems are somehow becoming like black box, probably. Especially for our students, which are becoming like researchers very soon. They really like to play with new gadgets and new technologies, and they really don't know what is happening in those systems. That was a really good message, actually. And I was thinking when you were talking about the defense in depth, I was thinking probably these days, like machine learning, deep learning, and all these things are used somehow to somehow provide defense in depth, but apparently you are saying there are a lot of flaws.
Yeah, it's in the sense that I think for deep learning in particular, there are a lot of deployment issues. It's how can you make it easy to use? If you look at the antivirus software, it's extremely easy to use. You just double click, you get installed, and you don't worry about it. And it has its own deficiencies. It cannot detect new vulnerabilities. It has to update the database. It's always very reactive. Anomaly detection has its advantage, but then you have to build a model. You have to learn the normal behavior, and it takes a long time, and you have to tweak because it's a trade-off between the accuracy, recall, and so you don't want to have a lot of false positives, and you sort of you have to ask yourself, am I conservative or am I more liberal in terms of accepting alerts? So that is very hard to do plug and play, and so a lot of this and very little research papers address that. But if you think about deployment, that's the first question you come up.
Yeah, I understand. We have a question from one of the participants. Is open source more, in general, secure or less?
Interesting.
Is open source in general more secure or less? It's a good question.
It is, yeah. So this is a good question. So think of app iOS and Android, right? So Android is open source. Lots of research, lots of like massive amount of Android security papers that help Google improve Android system and the way they screen Android apps. iOS is closed sourced, and very little people are able to figure out what's going on. And so you don't get this community support, community's effort on examining this. So in general, I was, but of course it's hard to say blankly, but then, open source, if it's popular enough, you get more eyes on it, inspecting, examining it, you benefit from it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're just going to blindly use those codes, probably not really secure,
right,
of course.
Yeah, yes. And then a lot of the commercial products, so you don't know. And then for research, it's a little difficult. So it's for our PCI measurement work, because they allow, so we pay them, and then so we set up an e-commerce website, and then it gets scanned. So we don't have to know how their code is actually implemented, but then their performance is reflected by whether or not they can detect vulnerabilities on our testbed. But then, for our CryPTOGUARD work, we have to sort of, for certain type of comparison evaluation, you have to, if you cannot tell their performance, you have to have their code. And if it's closed source, then you cannot measure it. But then the researchers, so you do whatever you have to do. You collaborate with people, and so. But then if we don't do it, then no one will do it. So that's become. I start to realize this just a few years ago, because if I open a company, I will say my tool works perfectly. I will certainly not say it has this deficiency, this limitation. Well, how can I make money, right?
Yeah, no chance.
So it is, everyone has different roles, and then researchers, so, we just have to, that's our responsibility.
That's very true. Yeah, that's very true. And also you mentioned about, again, deep learning or usage of this machine learning, AI, and these days in these cyber physical systems, we see a lot of autonomous systems, and these kind of algorithms can help us in detecting the attacks, but they can also be point of attack. So as you mentioned, we need to understand the attack surface and all these things. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, that was really good. If we don't have any other question, which seems we don't, we will have 10 minutes break, and then after the break, we will have another interesting session on security in military applications. And I would like to thank you, Daphne, again for your time and for the interesting talk, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.